Hello and welcome back. It's been a few months, but today we are going to continue on with part 3 of the 1981 YZ250. You can see we've got the engine on the bench here, so we're going to have a look at it today. I'm not sure how far we're going to go into this. I'm going to initially take the head off, the jug, and just do some measurements. If everything's within spec, I'm really not going to tear this whole thing down. But if we find that it's out of spec, we may investigate a little bit further. Again, this is not really going to be my build. This is my buddy's build. I'm just kind of taking it apart and trying to direct him here and there as I can. So you may not see a whole lot more content on this particular bike, but we'll just have to see how it goes. I'm not sure exactly what the wire tie there is for. I believe it held on the air box, but we're going to start by cutting that off, and then we will actually drain the oil. Now, before I get to the oil, here's where you fill the oil, obviously. But here's where you drain it, on the bottom of the crankcase. Now, I'm not sure how well this is going to show up, but as you can tell, in the past, someone has rounded over this bolt. So what I may end up doing is actually draining the engine oil from the fill tube instead of the actual drain hole. I'm not sure if that is seized in there or not. I may give it a try just to see how it goes. If it turns out to be really difficult, I'm just going to leave it as is. We've got a 12mm 12-point socket, and let's see what happens. Yeah, it's just completely useless. So rather than spend any more time on that, I'm just going to do it like I was originally going to do it. Take out the drain plug, and then tilt it on its side. That's some old oil. Now we can take the head off. It should be 12mm as well. And it is. And there's just 6 nuts here. It should just pop off. There we go. That looks really clean. Little dings, but I'd say this piston has been replaced at some point. Definitely. Look how clean that is. Now, I'm really tempted not to go any further with this just because it is so clean. I mean, this piston does not look like it's ever been fired, or it's been fired very little. It's a little browning right there. It doesn't appear that it's been cleaned. Normally, when you take the head off, you're going to see the piston. It's going to be black on top, no matter what, just from firing. There'll be a lot of black soot on there. There'll be some indication that it's been used. This looks to be brand new, or very close to it. I mean, it is a little brown, but maybe ran a couple of times. I find that kind of hard to believe, but I'm not for sure. So we're going to take the jug off. That way we can measure the piston ring, the gap size, just to make sure that we don't need to get a new piston or rings or have this bored out, anything like that, just to make sure that it's all going to have really good compression. Now, my buddy's not going to do a full restoration on this. He just wants to get it running to a point, because we found that the parts are very hard to come by and they're very expensive, which we knew initially. Just he did not know how hard they were going to be to come by. The rear shock, to have that rebuilt, which is something I can't do, was $300 just for the rear shock. So the front suspension, I'm not sure. We haven't. So it's going to be a very expensive build, even just to get this running and looking presentable. So we want to spend as little money as possible. Not like the 250F, where I just kind of went, well, a little bit overboard. And to get the jug off, there are bolts right here, or nuts rather. And one of them is very difficult to get to. These are 14mm. I need to take this Kickstarter off. It's getting in my way. Appears to be a 21mm nut. Not very tight either. I'll have to look at the original parts list. I don't think that's an original nut. It could be, but looks a little off to me. I'm sure that's not original. This boot has a lot of cracks on the side. It's useless. I will give it to him to reorder, but there's going to be no reason to reuse that at all. Check out the reeds. I mean, visually they look okay. Beyond that, I'm not sure. And we do have a little bit of rust on the inside of the bottom of the piston. There's some rust on, it looks like the sides of the piston and maybe on the crankshaft itself, or the crank rod. This is a air-cooled 2-stroke. It's not a water-cooled 4-stroke or even a water-cooled 2-stroke. So you would think, well, head gasket looks milky. No, I smell a lot of gas in there. It still could be a head gasket, but I think maybe water has gotten in here from maybe sitting outside, something like that. Or it could have been a number of things. Definitely not coolant, because there is no coolant in the bike. So we'll have to investigate that. Now you have to be a little bit smarter than the tools you're using. I like to use these adjustable gear wrenches. Well, they don't fit in here, but a standard wrench will fit in there. Was not thinking clearly. So now that we've got this worked out, we'll finish taking the rest of them off, and then we can have a closer look. We've got them all out. I pushed the piston as far down as it would go because when I take this off, I don't want it to necessarily slap against the case really hard. So that way it has less travel. Voila. I do see little shards of metal, which is not a great sign. See all that little metal on my glove? And there is definitely some scoring on the piston. But the jug itself, ooh, the top of it looked fine. The bottom of it doesn't look so great. So we're going to get this cleaned up as best we can, and then we'll assess the damages after that. There's no up and down play. There's side to side, which is normal, but you're looking for up and down. There's zero up and down play at all. I do have little shavings. That's not the end of the world. You may not even need to split the case. You could possibly just give it a good clean, but we may end up splitting it anyway. So we're going to give us a good clean, the piston and the jug, and then see what we're looking at from there. There's definitely some scoring on this piston. Of course, here's the inside, and this little, those are metal shavings right there. Look at all those. So it's not looking real promising for this engine. Again, we almost did not take this apart because it did look really good from the outside. I'm going to have to clean this up really well, but right here, I don't know if you can see that, that looks like possibly a crack right there. If that's a crack, then this is shot. I guess you could probably have that repaired, maybe re-sleeved. They could, but I need to clean that up. It doesn't really feel like a crack, but it definitely looks like a crack. Again, we're looking at this area right here. Right there. That black mark. So we're gonna clean it up and then we'll go from there. We're back. I've got most of the oil, or I think most of the oil, drained out of this. So now we're gonna take the side cover off. I'm still not sure if I'm gonna split the cases or not, but we're gonna start here. Crack these open. That should be all of them. It's the plastic. Oh, we've still got oil in there. Like I said, thought we got most of it out, but apparently not. Now you never want to put a screwdriver in here to pry this apart. These are aluminum parts and they will scar very easily. So always get like a soft mallet. You could use like a plastic wedge. You can do it that way, but as long as you just keep on tapping on it, it should come apart. This one is not all the way done. There we go. Actually, that looks pretty clean. There's our clutch, of course. Now you'd have to take this off to change the clutch anyway. I just want to see if there's any metal shavings anywhere else. I didn't see any when I really drained the oil. It did look a little dirty, but we've got some particles up here. So this looks pretty good. Now that I've cleaned up the area just a little bit, I'm doing a little bit of investigating before I take anything else apart. And the first thing I notice, there is a chip right there. So I doubt this is floating in the engine somewhere. It could be, but I don't see any signs of it. This was probably chipped. Maybe they took it apart, dropped it on the ground, and then stuck it back in there. I'm not entirely sure. But nonetheless, there is a chip there. It's probably fine with it, but I'm going to at least inform my buddy. And I still may take off the clutch. We'll see. I'm not sure. It really depends on how far he wants to take this. This could get very expensive. Not as expensive as a 4-stroke, but nonetheless, it can still get expensive. I am going to take off the clutch just because I need to inspect it anyway. Now when you install a clutch, you want to do a crisscross pattern. Certainly not one in a row, such as I'm doing here. See, it's actually worse than I thought. There's also a chip right there. Not exactly looking that great. Now this has obviously been taken apart at one point. There's this washer. You're supposed to bend these tabs up onto the actual nut, and of course that has not been done. They're just kind of put on there, but not really. Get a better look of it there. See, these should be folded against the nut, and they are not. They're just kind of sitting there. There we go. And they actually look okay. Of course, I'm just looking at the top and bottom. Have to inspect all of them. The actual metal rings don't look that great. Just the pads. So that will probably need replaced. I'm gonna go ahead and bend these out of the way and then we'll take that nut off. I do believe I've got the washer moved out of the way well enough to get the nut off. We'll see. Voila. There's the nut. And our cage, our basket rather, should come right out. And the basket actually looks fairly decent, aside from that washer. One thing you want to look out for, you'll see these black marks right here. Those can form grooves. Those are basically the fingers from the clutch smashing up against that. Now these are not deep. If they are deep, you can somewhat sand them away, but you don't want to go too far. There's too much slop. That's not a good thing either. Of course, these may have been, nope. I thought I saw one that looked like it had a little work done to it, but no. And they're not deep at all. Those are just marks basically. So that's a good clutch basket. That's kind of a surprise. based on the condition of this. So this, again, this could have been dropped when they took it out of the engine at some point. Now this is the actual outer basket. Again, the grooves, you want to look at those. Now these are pretty deep, but they're not too deep. You can see it almost like a step ladder pattern right here. They're actually pretty deep now that I'm looking at it. We'll see if we can work with that. Now this, I almost wonder if it's been replaced based on the condition of these two pieces. But the inner bushing looks really good. The gears, they all look fine. I'm sure we could file these down and get more life out of it. It's probably fine anyway. It's an old bike. I'm not sure the last time it did run. Not sure if I'm going to do a complete teardown on this or not. And what I'm doing here, this is not a telltale sign, but you can usually feel a bad bearing. You just get a feel for it, and you can kind of tell. But there's no shavings in here. And I don't recall if we had any shavings when I drained the oil. I don't think we did. We just had a little bit of residue up here. And more than likely, that is from the cylinder. So I think for now, that's going to conclude this video. I'm going to stop right here, get in touch with my buddy, and see what he wants to do. The clutch, we can just file down. It doesn't look all that bad. Personally, if I were just going to play around with this, like I typically do on a motorcycle, dirt bike, I don't really race anymore. It's been years. I would probably just put it back together and call it good on this bike. Now, if this were a newer bike, or if he had plans on possibly racing or anything like that, I would definitely do a complete teardown. I'm going to leave that up to him. Maybe I'll file down those teeth on the clutch basket. Again, he probably wouldn't notice any difference. And possibly replace the piston and rings. I think those little bits of metal that I saw, which were very fine, they're still there. I think those are just from the cylinder itself. I don't think it's anything else. I would say it would be this chip, but it wouldn't have made its way in there, and we would find the chip somewhere in the case here. I haven't found that. So what we may do in the next video, if he decides he wants to keep it as is, we'll go ahead and measure the piston and the cylinder just to see if we need to have it bored out or anything. I doubt it will. Even though this engine has some things wrong, it doesn't look like it's been used that much. It's painted, that part looks bad. That's just somebody put some paint on it and they just did a horrible job. And also the inside of this it's dirty oil, but there's no shavings at all. It's all just dirt, just nasty old oil. So who knows when the oil was changed last. So we'll have at least one more video on this. Hopefully we'll make it a little bit sooner than, what, half a year, however long it's been. And we'll either be doing a complete rebuild or just freshening some things up and measuring, that kind of thing. So that's going to do it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, post those below. And as always, thanks for watching. We'd have to do this anyway. So help if you had a charged battery.